Hello everyone, my name is Emmanuel Frenrich. I'm the founder and CEO of Paladir Consulting, and in today's video I'm extremely proud and excited to introduce what I call the ultimate guide to e-commerce business strategy, how to dominate your market, grow sales and profits, and boost your valuation. Now, this video has been the result of a long time, of a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of research. But I'm very happy that I can finally introduce this to everyone watching this video right now. And the idea is that in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you what are the steps, what is the framework that you can use as an e-commerce business owner or executive in an e-commerce company to really dominate your market and get to the next level. And I'll be sharing all the benefits of following this process in just a few minutes, but to give you a brief idea of what we're going to cover in this presentation, first, we'll be seeing the 4-step strategic domination framework for e-commerce. Now, what this means in very concrete terms is that I've identified through a lot of research and also a lot of personal experience in the field of e-commerce, working with clients and running companies myself, that there are 4 very simple steps, not easy, but very simple steps for identifying a strategy and then actually implementing and executing that strategy. Because again, it's all nice and fancy if you have a strategy, but then you actually have to make sure you can execute it and actually get results from it. And the other thing that I'll be sharing with you in this presentation is 6 winning e-commerce strategy templates and case studies. Now, what this means is the field of strategy for a very long time, I mean, it's been created decades ago, right? For companies that were typically working in brick and mortar stores, like in retail stores and things like that. And it hasn't really been adapted to the world of e-commerce and online commerce. So what I've done is I've studied some of the world's most successful e-commerce companies to see what are the patterns in how they've established their lead in the market, how they've become so valuable. And I've sort of extracted 6 extremely effective strategies from this that can be applied to almost any market. And obviously it doesn't mean you're exactly going to follow one of these 6, but it can sort of give you ideas and perspective. And then lastly, I'll be giving 2 and a few more key distinctions to really maximize the effectiveness of your strategy as an e-commerce company. And there are a lot of pitfalls and mistakes and misconceptions about strategy that I've seen clients do, and I think this is going to really help you to avoid those and avoid a lot of time and money waste. So I'm very excited. I hope you are too, because there's going to be a lot in this presentation. So let's just get right into it. So first of all, why do you need strategy? So to give you a little bit of background, so as the CEO and founder of Paladir Consulting, we're a digital consulting firm working exclusively with e-commerce companies, usually in the health and beauty sector, but occasionally outside of those sectors as well. And I work with a broad range of clients who have all kinds of different growth metrics, who have all kinds of different starting points. And what I've seen working with people who are actually clients and who have extremely good results, and companies that sometimes we don't want to work with, and the difference between those is usually that the companies that do well have a very good strategy in place, and they're actually executing that strategy. So to put it simply, as I said in the keynote here, strategy really is the missing link most e-commerce businesses lack to truly get to the next level. And so strategy is not this sort of mystical, theoretical thing that you only teach in business school and then you can brag to your employer about it. When done well, strategy gives you extremely practical, applicable insights that can lead to exceptional results. So what are the benefits? Well, first of all, you have easier growth. I mean, when you have a good strategy, you're properly positioned in the marketplace, and it makes the entire growth process easier. Whether it's advertising, customer retention, operations, it allows everything to really work together towards a common aim, and that allows you to make your growth much easier and much faster too. You also get usually, not always, but usually higher profit margins, unless you're going for a sort of cost advantage type of strategy. But a good strategy will help differentiate your company from other competitors, which means that for sure it's going to be more profitable over the long term. So it may not be exactly higher profit margin, but it means you can sustain your e-commerce company's profitability over the long term. You obviously get a higher valuation. I mean, as myself, an investor and working with a lot of companies that have very big investors and funds, investors love a company with a clear, proven strategy because it really gives them a framework to see how the continued success of the company is going to happen. And it gives the executives the same perspective. So it really aligns everyone towards a common goal. And then you have protection from competition. So I always like to say I personally hate competition. The more I can avoid it, the better off I am. And it's the same thing for all our clients and for anyone watching this. Even if you're in an extremely competitive space, strategy can help you to be protected, to be shielded from competition by following the steps I'll be getting into in just a minute. You get improved decision making. So as an executive, most executives will end up spending their time making important decisions. But if you don't have a framework to really tie these decisions together, you can often make different decisions that will actually impair the effectiveness of each decision. So having a clear strategy really makes the decision-making process easier. And lastly, this just from personal experience, it also makes everything more enjoyable. So if you're part of a business, implementing a winning strategy, it's just a lot more fun. Things aren't done at random, and you're consistently making progress towards winning consistently. And if you're anything like me, you like winning in your market. You want to dominate your market, and having a strategy allows you to actually do that and see how you can continue doing that over the long term. So anyway, I hope I don't have to promote the idea of strategy more, because I think if you're watching this video at this point, you're probably pretty convinced. However, let's talk about how most entrepreneurs and executives go wrong when creating a strategy for their e-commerce businesses. So what I've seen working with e-commerce companies is most business owners launch products and expand their business in a very random pattern. They follow a linear expansion model that creates massive problems and leads the company to underperform. So just to really clarify things, developing or selling a product because it's easy to sell or has low barriers to entry is a terrible reason to sell a product. That's just one example of how this shows up in very practical ways. Basing your strategy on what other players in your industry are doing is a recipe for disaster. And not having a clear strategy is also a terrible mistake. What this means is if you can't clearly articulate your strategy in less than 60 seconds, you do not have a strategy. And this is something we'll get into. That's extremely important. So a few mistakes that I see with strategy. Again, barriers to entry. Most business owners try to expand into quote unquote easy growth avenues, or what they perceive as easy. Unfortunately, those opportunities are usually easy for competitors to pursue too and provide little to no long-term value. So I won't get into these things too much because it's the topic of this presentation, but part of strategy is the concept of barrier entry. Again, copying is not a strategy. Deriving principles from a successful company and copying a competitor are two entirely different things. Copying the strategy of an established competitor almost never works out. And being fixated on what your competitors are doing also almost never works out. And then another common one that I've seen is excess practicality. So most business owners let the apparent constraints of reality determine the strategy. And oftentimes these constraints are not unbreakable and are really only in our minds. Now, I'm not one of those mindset gurus or whatever you want to call it, but there is a lot of this in business where usually the people who do well in business are very practical and they're very results oriented, but as a result, sometimes they get bounded by the constraints of reality a little bit too much. So making time your ally is a big one. So most great strategies will imply short-term loss, and while they require patience, they also eventually result in great sustainable gain. You must be able to delay the instant rewards to dominate your market. So I see this a lot. It's a human instinct that we want the fruit now. We want the harvest to be now. But the truth is, if you have a fruit tree, to take a very basic analogy, well, first you have to nurture the tree, and I'm not a big expert on the fruit trees, but there's a process, right? First, you have to make sure the right conditions are there for the tree to prosper, and the harvest comes later. So you have a short-term loss for long-term gain, and the same idea is in the case in business. Another mistake that I see is having the wrong time horizon, so heavily related to that last point. It's key to reduce your hyperbolic discounting, which basically means the tendency to overvalue smaller, sooner rewards over larger, later rewards. Strategy is the way to produce a clear path to the later, larger rewards. So again, as an executive, one of your primary goals is to make sure you have the correct long-term view, and that's really the only way to ensure the long-term continued success of your business. Anyway, those are just a few of the mistakes. I think you'll get a better perspective on exactly why they are mistakes in just a second. But without further ado, let's get right into it. The 4-step strategic domination process that will allow you to dominate your industry and ensure your company's profitability over the long term. So step number 1 is intelligence. So for every one of those steps, I've tried to find a relevant quote because it adds something to the video, I think. So the first one is from Sun Tzu, and what he says is, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So what he means here is the importance of intelligence, of knowing as much as you can about your own company and the companies of other competitors. So the first step of any good strategy is gathering as much data and information as possible about your industry, your competitors, related industries, and your target market. Specific attention must be paid to factors that are usually ignored, such as untapped market, for example, what we call non-customers, and I'll get into that in a little bit, or seemingly unrelated industries that are actually serving relevant audiences. Look beyond the surface and identify the factors the market truly cares about. Identify things companies put a lot of effort into that actually don't matter. Identify untapped needs, untapped niches, and open spaces, and of course, ignore conventional wisdom, which is going to be a recurring theme here. So for every step, I've identified a few tools and frameworks that I've found to be extremely helpful when developing a strategy. So the first one is the good old BCG matrix. And the idea here is that a good strategy will usually, but not always, imply becoming the market leader in a fast-growing segment. To accomplish this, you can either find a better way to serve an existing segment or even create a new segment that you can dominate. So again, this is just an overview. I'll give you more details on how to actually apply that. The second useful tool is the Blue Ocean framework, which you may or may not be familiar with. But it's generally useful to identify what customers in your chosen segment truly care about, and try to reorganize the key industry factors to better serve customers at a lower cost. This is, again, an extremely important part of strategy. At the end of the day, it is about providing more value to the customer, ideally at a lower cost, or at least significantly more value if it's not at a lower cost. Then you have the third sort of framework of business moats. So a good strategy will usually lead to the slow but continued development of a moat around the business, making it harder for competitors to steal the company's market share. So this is an old Warren Buffett concept, which basically says that in capitalism, when you have a castle that's full of riches and that has prosperous merchants or whatnot, well, every so often you're going to get these bandits and these maybe enemy castles coming in and trying to besiege your castle, trying to take over the castle. So in the economy, what this means is when you have a company that's very profitable and doing very well, you're inevitably going to have other players trying to enter this profitable segment and trying to drag down your returns on capital. And so you need to really think about, how do I create a moat around my e-commerce business so that even if other people see and know that I'm doing very well, they can't just come in and reduce my company's profitability by bringing down prices and adding competition. The fourth element of winning strategy is that it's usually a good strategy is not the one that sounds good or pleases investors. It's a strategy driven by the audience the business is trying to serve and its needs. So if your strategy is not focused on the customer and what you can give the customer, what extra benefits you can give to the customer, usually it's going to be a failed strategy. Another interesting concept to keep in mind is numbers versus insights. So when you're gathering intelligence, when you're doing research, it's done partly through numbers, but a lot of it is done through qualitative analysis. So a common mistake is letting the numbers overshadow unquantifiable insights. And this is very important. What I see a lot of companies doing is they obsess over like the growth rate of the market and like the revenue numbers of competitors, and a lot of the time the best insights in strategy are not going to be insights that are quantifiable. And you need some sort of intuition to really make the strategy a very successful one. And then you have what I call unconventional research. So part of every intelligence gathering process should be about analyzing seemingly unrelated industries to find insights into how they develop their strategies. So you can gain a lot by studying things that other competitors are not necessarily studying, that they're things that they're not necessarily looking at. Anyway, this is just to give you an idea. So to get in a little bit more detail, so the Boston Consulting Group Shared Growth Matrix, which is the first concept we discussed, is an extremely simple framework, and that's what I like about it. So you only have two variables in this framework. You have so it's all about the market that you're in, right? So the growth that you see on the left side is not the growth of the company, it's the growth of the market. So what you look at in this framework is how quickly is the market that we are positioned in growing. And if it's growing at more than 10 to 15% per year, we'll say it's a high fast growing market. And if it's growing below 10% per year, you would say it's a slow growing market. And then again, it depends, like it's not that black and white. If it's growing at 7 or 8%, it could be considered fast growing as well. But that's very important. And then the second variable is your company's market share within this market. And the winning formula is when you can have what is known as a star business, a concept that was introduced to me by Richard Koch, which is someone I'll reference several times in this video. So when you have a business that is in a fast-growing market and that is the leader in terms of market share in that market, 9 times out of 10, almost inevitably, that company is going to end up becoming incredibly valuable and incredibly profitable. And what's interesting about this process is back in the days, people used to use this process to sort of identify amongst the businesses that they already have, which ones are star businesses, cash cows, question marks, etc. But what very few companies do, what very few companies attempt to do, is building one of those from the ground up, from scratch. So what you can do is, if you can redefine the industry that you're in to make it a fast-growing segment, then you can easily get almost all the market share in this segment and get basically an unbeatable competitive position within that market. And that's going to allow you to do extremely well over the long term. Now, second concept is the blue ocean strategy. And here I've attached the blue ocean strategy canvas. So obviously here I'm showing the difference between Netflix and cable TV. So the idea of the blue ocean framework, to really make it simple, is you identify all these variables in so here, to try to make it a little bit structured, here it's really about which market are we going to compete in. That's really the first question that you want to identify. And it's a traditional question within strategy is, what market are we going for? Can we redefine this market to make it a fast-growing market? And can we realistically gain the lead in market share within this segment we've identified, right? So once you've found something where the answer is yes, 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 well then how do you actually go about doing it? Well, this is where you really want to identify all the variables within this market. So you can see here in the sort of like visual entertainment market, where you have commercials, news programs, live sports. They identified all these different variables, and then try to see which variables do people really care about, and also which variables do people hate, right? So when you look at cable TV, well, no one likes commercials. What did Netflix do? They just completely removed commercials. Of course, they're charging money for it. But you also pay money for your cable TV, right? And then one thing that you can see with the Netflix is sometimes there are variables that aren't served at all in the industry. So for example, the ability to watch from any location. Well, it used to not even be a thing, and then Netflix made it a thing. So when you identify the variables, you're looking at what's already being delivered to customers by existing players. And then you look at what is not being delivered or not being delivered enough. And then your goal as the executive, the business owner, is to raise the variables people really care about, and then to reduce the variables that people really don't like or that really don't matter. So that's the overview of the Blue Ocean framework. And then to talk about the concept of moats. So which moats really matter? What are examples of moats? And because by giving you examples of moats, you can sort of have in your mind all these different tools that you can use to make your business harder to compete with. Well, the first one and less well-known one is the value proposition design. So what this means is It means you have a product that is incredibly easy and pleasant to use. And that's actually somewhat hard to replicate. I mean, you can have a Chinese company trying to replicate whatever gadget that is, but if it really works well and there's an incredible value proposition design, it's going to be very hard to compete with. Then you have customer obsession, which is actually an interesting one. This one is debatable whether it really is a mode or not. In my opinion, it is. So when you have a company that's really obsessed with giving the customer an exceptional experience, that's actually hard to replicate because there are certain operational processes, there are certain ways of communicating with customers that add up together and are really hard to replicate. You can replicate some standalone tactics, but to replicate the overall customer obsession is very difficult. A good example of that was Zappos, of course. And then you have, low cost is an obvious one, right? If you can sustainably sell your products at a lower price than competitors and still remain profitable, then obviously it's very hard to compete with you. You have differentiated technology. This is actually a big one for e-commerce. If you can have superior technology it can be technologies related to customer acquisition, to operations, to maybe tracking customer retention and tracking net promoter score. Like all these differentiated technologies can make it difficult to compete with your company, assuming that they're hard to replicate, of course. And then you have distribution. Distribution is an obvious one, right? If you have, I know we're talking about e-commerce, but if you have your e-commerce product in every store in America, you obviously have a huge advantage over a competitor. You have economies of scale. So when you can sell a lot of units of a particular product, you can usually get it for cheaper than other competitors. And this is where market share, of course, becomes very important. Growth capital just means if you can have access to a lot of money, then you can essentially operate at a loss for a longer period than other companies. And then you have the good old network effects, which means if you can create a structure in your business where the more people buy, the more users there are, the more valuable the company becomes, well, that's also a moat, right? Because then it becomes very difficult for another company to come in and copy this network effect. So those are some moats. There are more. You could argue some of those are not really moats, but I think it should give you a pretty good idea of what I mean by moats. So now let's get to step 2. So the first step is we follow this intelligence process, and I hope I've been able to give you some tools and frameworks to keep in mind as you're doing research. Of course, the research process is also going to consist of looking at probably some research reports. There's a lot of research reports you can buy online, doing an audience analysis, looking at what audiences want, doing a competitive analysis. So there's a lot of things that are very standard, and I don't want to get into those in this video because you can find those anywhere. I'm trying to be a little bit, bring you new concepts and ideas in this video. So step number 2 is the turning point. So what is the turning point? So let's talk about the quote first because I like quotes. So this one is very, very simple. Pursue one great decisive aim with force and determination by Karl von Clausewitz. I probably completely misspelled that name, but who was one of the most brilliant war strategists of all time, along with Sun Tzu, who essentially allowed the German armies to dominate ever since Germany was united, and he was essentially one of the inspirations behind the Blitzkrieg strategy, which obviously led to some poor outcomes for the world, but was a brilliant war strategy. So what is the turning point? Well, using the previously gathered intelligence, it's time to turn it into real applicable insights. We're looking for a turning point, the one single powerful method or idea that will make success in a chosen market inevitable. When consistently applying this single powerful method, every aspect of running the company becomes clear, focused, and effective. Anything that doesn't fit within this single strategy must be ignored or eliminated. This single idea should ideally give customers more of what they care about and less of what they don't like, improve your cost structure, strengthen your competitive moat, and secure continued growth. So a lot of things are at stake with this turning point, as you can see. So what can you do here? Well, let's talk about the key tools and frameworks for this step number 2. So for this one, I'm going to give entire credit to Richard Koch. Again, brilliant author, one of the people I admire the most in the world. And he developed what he called the Simplify framework. And to try to really summarize, I highly recommend you read the book Simplify, which is an amazing book. To summarize this, most strategies usually rely around proposition simplifying, which means improving the utility, experience, or aesthetics of the product, or cost simplifying, which means reducing or eliminating marginal features that people don't really care about to make the product much cheaper. So what this means is you have these two relatively clear paths to a winning strategy, which is either proposition simplifying or cost simplifying. And I find those mental models slash frameworks to be quite useful when developing a strategy. Then you have customer centricity. So we touched on this. A winning strategy is centered on what customers care about the most. Markets are extremely competitive, and it's usually more effective to pick a customer segment to focus on than try to reach the entire market. So what this means is, if you can focus on who your strategy is serving and not just the market that you're in, you can do very, very well, and it gives you an edge. Then you have the idea of trade-offs, and this one comes from Michael Porter, which is that a good strategy usually involves making choices. You can't be all things to all people. You need to choose carefully what you focus on to avoid diverging your energy and resources. And this is something we'll get into also a little bit more in a minute. So then you have this idea of the top-down versus bottom-up strategy, which is actually a big sort of debate in the strategy world. And the best thing that I found is just to mix them both. So the top-down approach to identifying your turning point is you look at the market that you want to compete in, and then you find the ideal, most effective focus that would yield a sustainable advantage, right? So this top-down approach is essentially a theoretical approach where you ignore what you're currently doing and you just look, in an ideal world, what would be the strategy that would allow me to win in this market? And I found this one to be the one that business owners are usually not doing, that executives are not doing. And the reason why is because, again, they're bounded by the constraints of reality, but think of it as a thought experiment. Imagine you had no involvement in this current market segment you want to get in. What would be, in an ideal world, the best strategy that would really allow us to dominate this segment? And then you can get into the bottom-up approach. So, of course, you must also look at your existing business and determine your existing strengths and capabilities to inform which focus points are the most compatible with what you have. So of course, you can't just be in a dream world where you could do anything. So first you look at the ideal strategy, and then you look from the bottom up, you look at what you already have. What are the assets, resources, and capabilities that your firm already has? And then you try to mix those together. How can we use those resources, assets, and capabilities to get to the strategy? And of course, this is where it's an art as much as it is a science, but I'm trying to make it a science as much as possible here. And the last one is applicable. So any strategy you choose must give you concrete, applicable insights on an almost daily basis. It should inform how you hire employees, market your products, communicate with customers, manage operations, and allocate capital. There is no point to having a strategy just to look good on the wall of your office. I mean, I hope that's an obvious one, but it's always good to mention it. So I'll give you some examples of big companies' turning points. So for Amazon, you had these three key themes that really blend together. So when I say just one core idea, well, the core idea of Amazon is it's all about the customer. And then, you can sort of break it down within three separate things. You have the wide availability, so constant focus on increasing product selection, extreme customer experience focus, nearly anything that enhances the customer's experience must be pursued no matter the cost. And then everyday low prices, constantly pushing to lower prices and pass on those savings to the end consumer. So Amazon, and if you read about the strategy they had, it really hasn't changed much. And you could also add like the focus on innovation potentially, where they always try to innovate, and even if a lot of it fails, whatever works compensates for what doesn't work. But by just focusing on these three key themes, look at where they're at now. So that's the power of strategy. Obviously, oversimplified here. So for Google, you had extreme search relevance and an extreme simplicity, speed, and ease of use. Again, those are not the e-commerce examples, but I hope that by using the examples of big companies, anyone can resonate with this. Everyone knows these companies. So I hope it's helpful within the presentation. But L'Oreal's turning point is what they call the universal brand portfolio. So it's creating as many unique brands as possible, which cater particularly well to certain segments of the market. And by having all these different brands, well, they essentially take over the market and it becomes very difficult to compete with them. And then you have Starbucks as turning point, which is essentially making coffee an experience, not a commodity. So by turning the coffee consumption experience from a commodity purchase to a true multi-sensory experience and a unique experience, well, they've been able to take over the market and really almost create their own market segment. And then, of course, dominate it because they created it. So it's a very good example. But now let's get into the sort of the meat of things. And I know there's a lot of content in this presentation. I'm trying to pack as much as possible in the shortest period of time possible. So what are the 6 winning e-commerce strategy templates? You can come back to this slide if you want. I'm not going to read all of these because of this. Because I'm going to show you for each of these a very specific case study and how to actually implement this. So to give a little bit of background about this section, so I did a lot of research looking at very successful e-commerce companies. And I was really asking myself, how did they do this? Like, it's always easy in retrospect to look at it, but I was thinking, if we get back to the start, what was their thinking process? Like, what were they thinking that allowed them to create this breakthrough to really make their company dominate their market, right? Or if there was an established company, how did they pivot to get to the point where they are now? So it's almost a pre-success analysis that I tried to perform. And I came up with these 6 strategies. It doesn't mean that a strategy that is not within these 6 cannot be successful. I'm just trying to sort of open your mind and put good ideas into your mind to get you thinking about strategy. So let's talk about the company Purple here. And they followed what I deemed the performance superiority strategy. So what is Purple? Purple is a company selling mattresses, and they did they made a lot of things different about their mattresses, but to summarize within 3, they added 2 inches of breathable gel into the mattress. They added extra layers of foam to provide superior padding in the mattress, and then they added 1,800 air channels to keep the bed cool all night, right? So you can see how they made very specific and clear improvements to the mattress that make their mattresses superior. So what is the takeaway from, and obviously if you're interested, just go to the website, you can browse through it, it's very interesting. So what is the takeaway? Well, what you want to do in the performance superiority strategy is you want to break down exactly what makes a great product for consumers in your market using first principles, right? So in the case of the mattress, what do people care about in a mattress, right? How comfortable it is, how cool it is, how my body feels in the morning after waking up, all these different things, right? So those are the first principles of what people will almost always care about within the particular market and product segment you're trying to dominate. And then you let this guide your product development process, and you have to be relentless. You keep improving these features consistently over time. You can even rethink the products in a specific industry from scratch to deliver, again, coming back to the blue ocean idea, deliver more of what people want and less of what they don't want. So in the performance superiority strategy, what is the moat? Well, first of all, you have the patents and the intellectual property, which it's getting harder to enforce it, but it's still a real thing. In the long-term moat would really be the unique capabilities of the business in developing superior products for this market segment. So you have a mix of differentiated technology and value proposition design that really blend well together. So I tried to rank each of those strategies. So the profit generation potency of performance superiority is very, very high, at least 9.5. I put 9.5 out of 10. I mean, this never 10 out of 10, but it's very, very good. If you have a product that is really superior to other products, you can charge a lot more for it because there's always a segment of the market that is looking for the best. And if you can be the best, you're going to get high margins and sustain profitability for a long time, assuming you can keep innovating and you don't get screwed over by competitors. The ease of implementation, however, is 4 out of 10. Now, what you'll see within those rankings is that there's obviously an inverse correlation between the ease of implementation and the profit generation potency. And this is very important to understand. It comes back to the idea of barrier to entry. The easier it is to do something, the lower the profit generation potency will be over the long term. So in this case, 4 out of 10 ease, but 9.5 out of 10 profit generation potency. So then you have the niche domination strategy. And I use Brickhouse Security as an example here. So Brickhouse Security sells all kind of products related to security and surveillance products, right? So how and it's a very successful company doing very well in the United States. So how did they do it? Well, they have a wide range of security and surveillance products. All their products are relatively unique or exclusive, and very important, the products are priced very competitively to make it hard to compete. So how do they actually make money? Well, of course, they have a small margin for every product, but whenever someone buys one of their products, they know that it's extremely likely that they will buy some of their other products, right? Like if you buy the GPS tracker, chances are you also want to buy the hidden camera, right? Because you're concerned about your security. So you're going to want to make sure that you have the highest level of security possible. So whatever people buy, they know that they're likely to buy the other products. So what's the takeaway? You define a particularly attractive and growing market segment, as always. That's the foundation, right? And then you focus on adding all the products related to this segment into your product line. And you also develop new products within the same segment. And then to add a little bit more, well, then you price them quite competitively. You still want to make a profit, but you price them competitively. You acquire as many customers as possible, and then you make sure that they buy the other products because it makes logical sense. So what is the moat? The moat is the ease of acquiring customers and the ability to boost the average lifetime value higher than any other company. You can outspend competitors and get a higher market share with relative ease. So you have a mix of sort of differentiated technology, some economies of scale, but really the advantage is on the advertising side here. And I've personally been involved with companies following this strategy, and it's a very, very effective strategy. So profit generation potency, it's 6 out of 10. Now, why is it only 6 out of 10? Because it's a little bit easier to replicate than the performance superiority. Because again, the ease of implementation is 8 out of 10. But what you'll find is it's not perfectly linear. So what's interesting here is it's easy to implement and there's still good profit generation potency. I think the niche domination strategy it's relatively sustainable because it's niche, so it's not always interesting for competitors to invest a lot of resources competing with you in this niche segment. It's a very good strategy. And the only downside is it can be a little bit harder to grow because you're not always going to have markets with huge addressable you're not going to have these huge addressable market that all these startups use in their presentations. Then you have the purchase experience transformation, which was famously used by Warby Parker. So what is Warby Parker? Well, they sell eyeglasses, sunglasses, and also contact lenses. So how did they transform the buying experience for glasses online? Well, on their website, the whole concept of the brand is you can pick 5 frames to try at home risk-free. They have a very simple process to select the correction of the glasses, the color of the glasses, and there's a whole bunch of different things you can customize in the glasses. And you can do it all online without speaking to anyone, and it's just a lot more convenient than actually going to a store and having to talk to all these people, etc. And they even have a quiz to receive personalized glasses recommendations. So what is the takeaway of Warby Parker's strategy? Well, you want to remove all the risk associated with buying products in your niche while maximizing the chances that the customer will get what they want without any hassle. So what you want to do is you want to make it much easier to visualize and customize your product line. You offer suggestions based on user preferences to reduce the decision-making required. So this one is all about the purchase experience. So when you find a market where the experience of buying online is currently not pleasant, there's a lot of hurdles and a lot of hassle in buying whatever specific product you're looking at in the market. And then you use the internet, you use the e-commerce process to make it a lot more pleasant to buy it. So what is the moat here? Well, the moat is you have a mix of differentiated technology and customer obsession. The customer gets significantly more of what she wants with much less risk, and the differentiated activities of the business can make this hard to replicate. So, obviously the actual website of Warby Parker can probably be quite easily replicated, but the actual experience that they have with delivering the risk-free glasses and making sure it makes economical sense, making sure they have the process to make sure people actually buy, that they keep buying in the future, well, that's not so easy to replicate. So ease of implementation actually puts 5.5 out of 10 because I believe when you actually change and improve the purchase experience and you make it work within the business and the operations, it's actually quite difficult to replicate. The profit generation potency, I put it at a 7 out of 10 because not every, the goal of this strategy is of course to charge more for your products, and the purchase experience improvement will not make everyone want to buy your product, and you can't necessarily charge crazy prices with this strategy. But obviously it's still a very sustainable profit generation potency, so it's still very good. Keep in mind, I'm very demanding with the profit generation potency, right? So your average e-commerce business that does not have a strategy, it's a 1 out of 10 profit generation potency, right? Maybe 2 out of 10. So here, when you think about 7 out of 10, I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars of earnings / profits for a very, very long time in a very sustainable way with very little capital requirements over the long term once it's set up. Then you have the subscription transition. Now, this is a favorite of mine. It's a strategy that Yoga Club used. So what is Yoga Club? Well, Yoga Club is an activewear subscription box. So there's a lot of hype around subscription boxes, but the subscription transition is the real strategy. It's not just about making a subscription box out of whatever industry you're in. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. But the gist of what they did is they use a quiz to determine user preferences, and then an algorithm determines the optimal activewear for the user, and then the user gets new outfits on a monthly basis and obviously benefits from savings because they are subscribed. What I love about this strategy is it's just so simple. When people subscribe, you can give them discounts, so there's a lower price. And then second, they get more of what they want because you have an algorithm that determines what they want and literally just gives it to them every month. It's a wonderfully simple strategy. So the takeaway here is you want to use the power of the internet and algorithms to help determine exactly what the end user wants. You provide the desired products on a monthly basis, or whatever, weekly or bi-monthly basis, while offering savings. And use the predictability of the cash flow to reinvest into improving the subscription experience. So you have obviously very predictable cash flow with this, so you use this predictable cash flow to make the experience of buying this subscription better and better, reduce your churn over time. So what is the moat? You have a mix of low cost, some network effects, because every additional user refines the algo to provide better recommendations, and the moat is of course maintained by focusing on subscriber growth. And another mode that I didn't mention here that is real is that as you improve the subscription experience, you're going to find all these different ways to reduce your churn rate. Over time, this allows you to spend more on advertising and makes it harder and harder to compete with your company. So the ease of implementation, I ranked it at 7 out of 10 because I think starting this strategy is not that difficult. But the reason why it's a 5 out of 10 profit generation potency, which is quite high considering the ease of implementation, is because once you've started this process, it becomes harder and harder to compete with you over time. And that's the kind of business that I like and that you should like. You should like a business where the longer you run the business, the harder it becomes to compete. And in general, it's the case. But with this one, it's a particularly pronounced pattern. Next, we have what I call the extreme audience focus. And this is a strategy that was very successfully implemented by a company called The Healthy Mummy. And I also like this strategy a lot. So the idea of what The Healthy Mummy did is they offer exclusively healthy products for busy, health-conscious moms. All their products have a consistent branding and marketing message. And then the moms, their busy moms, gather together and form a community that supports Healthy Mummy's market dominance. So it's funny to use the term market dominance for a company called Healthy Mummy, which is a very friendly company, but that's really what they did. The extreme audience focus is, the idea is you identify a specific target audience that is underserved by existing products on the market, right? You find a target audience, in this case they chose busy moms, where they have all these separate things that they need to fit their lifestyle. And none of these separate solutions really give them everything that they need. And then you design a product line specifically for this target audience, and you raise the bar on key features your particular audience cares about. And then you build a community around this audience to improve your competitive moat. What I love about this strategy is you change the boundaries of what your company sells. So you're not selling X product category or Y product category. You're selling to XYZ audience, and then whatever products or services can help this audience, you include them. And over time, this means, well, if you're, for example, a busy mom, well, you could go to another company and buy some smoothie pack for probably quite a bit less than what they're selling it for. But because you're part of a community and because you have the convenience of going to a store, to an online shop where you can literally buy every product that you need and every product is sort of tailored to what you need, you're willing to pay a premium for it. And furthermore, there's even a community. So if you get involved with the community, then you're even less likely to go shop around for cheaper options. So with this strategy, you have a mix of network effects, because every new member of the community makes it more valuable, and customer obsession. And the moat is maintained by finding new and unique ways of serving this particular audience all the time. So ease of implementation, 8 out of 10, because actually making the decision to do it and then actually doing it, there's not a huge disconnect there. Profit generation potency, it's 5 out of 10. It's also one of those where it really depends which audience you're choosing and how you're choosing to do it. But in general, it gives you a sustainable advantage to be profitable over the long term. Then you have the pure innovation strategy. I won't go into this one too much. This is sort of to inspire the innovators watching this video. But it can be very profitable to use innovation to create a new market, which is what Misty Robotics did. They essentially created a new robot with a lot of different technologies that allow you to make the robot do essentially whatever you want it to do. So they developed a robot with superior built-in capabilities. They made it customizable to add your own cool features, and then they allowed the robot to recognize people, feel touch, etc. So what is the takeaway? If you can combine technology with a deep focus on people, human beings, and what could make their life better to inform the development of an innovative product, you're going to do very well. Then you aggressively grow your newly created market segment to dominate quickly, and then you can pivot to a performance superiority or niche domination strategy afterwards to maintain your market dominance over the long term. Obviously, this one, very hard to do, 4 out of 10, but very profitable if you can do it. So I love working with, I'm saying this because I love working with companies that have something very innovative. It's very exciting. So if you can make it happen, I would highly encourage you to do it. So step number 3 is focused implementation. So the quote here comes from Basil Hart, another war strategist, who said, all the lessons of war can be reduced to a single word, concentration. So whenever you choose a strategy, it's not something you just do on the side. Strategy is not something you just do a little bit every week because you watched Emmanuel's video that talks about strategy, right? A strategy should become the core of your business, as I hope these examples illustrated. So it's time to focus every single aspect of the company, product development, marketing, finance, sales, operations, single-mindedly on executing the turning point that we identified previously. This is done in part through specific differentiated activities, a way to build strategy into all the activities of the business. And again, strategy is not done once, it must be done every day by everyone in the organization, whether they realize it or not. So what is this idea of differentiating activities? Well, every strategy must be implemented through specific decisions and actions that are consistently executed by employees and executives of the company. So once you have this strategy, it needs to be boiled down to some things that every person in the organization is going to do, right? And this is really what makes a strategy hard to compete with. It's not only having the strategy, but then making sure everyone in the organization does it consistently. And over time, it becomes harder and harder to compete with the company. Then you have, of course, the concept of accountability, which is every executive and manager must be held accountable for specific outcomes tied to the implementation of the strategy. Then you have the idea of measurement, which is that a good strategy will usually involve key performance indicators, which must be tracked and ruthlessly improved over time. However, these KPIs must be lead measures, which is the next concept. All performance indicators tracked must be lead measures, which means indicators which can be immediately acted upon instead of end results. And the typical example of that is if you want to publish a book, well, a lead measure would be writing X pages or X words, and publishing the book would be the lag measure, which is the outcome of all the lead measures. So by keeping executives and managers accountable for lead measures, you make it very simple and clear for them what they need to do to implement the strategy successfully. So as the person designing a strategy, and this is also something I do with clients, it's not just about the pie in the sky idea of the strategy that you have. It's then about boiling it down to specific lead measures that different people in the organization can take to make it happen consistently over time. And then there's the idea of no compromise, which is that in order to succeed, no compromise can be accepted in the implementation of the strategy. Even seemingly impossible problems must be considered solvable because they usually are. So it comes back to this idea of not being constrained by the boundaries of reality all the time. And then you have process culture. So instead of rewarding results, a good strategy should logically reward processes which are tied directly to the successful implementation of the strategy. Think winning the war, not winning the battle. So it's more valuable to have employees understand what they're doing and consistently following lead measures than simply like mindlessly pushing them to achieve certain KPIs, lag measures, right? So let's talk about a very brief example of Starbucks differentiated activities because it's the best example of this. And I do realize Starbucks is not an e-commerce shop, but I still find this valuable within this context. So of course, with Starbucks, you have the smell and the shop design. So all shops have a consistent smell and appearance tied to the strategy. So when Starbucks is building their new, I call it a shop, but their new bars, coffee bars or whatever, they make sure there's always a consistency to the smell and the appearance and design so that there's a familiarity that gets built in. You have the packaging and branding. Every Starbucks coffee cup, all Starbucks products, and even employee clothes follow consistent packaging and branding tied to the strategy. So again, when Starbucks makes coffee cups or whatever products they have, or they give clothes to their employees, there's a consistency coming from the strategy. And then, of course, you have the purchase experience. The way employees are trained, rewarded, and interact with customers is all tied to the strategy. Nothing is done at random. There's a clear path to almost every decision that they made in their company. Now, step 4, I called it eliminate and ignore. Another Sun Tzu quote, "He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight." Again, a very important idea. The most dangerous choice of all is not choosing. Every additional goal or activity you pursue removes value from your core well-planned strategy. Diversification and expansion are not a strategy. They're a tactic that can prove relevant or not depending on the overarching strategy. Eliminating and ignoring distractions requires ruthless discipline. It can be extremely appealing to spread yourself thin. The grass always seems greener elsewhere. And I'm absolutely guilty of this as well. It's always tempting to get into new markets, new ideas, new opportunities. But the truth is you cannot win by doing that. So the whole point of this video is to get you to think very hard about the strategy your company is going to pursue, right? And if you think very hard about this and you spend a lot of time and research and energy identifying how are you going to win in this market, once you find the answer to this, ignore everything else and focus on this and this only, right? So one idea that can prove to be helpful here is the idea of the 80-20 of the 18-20. So you may be familiar with the idea, the 80-20 principle, which states that 20% of the causes in any particular area will lead to 80% of results. So what this means is very few things actually matter. But something that I find extremely helpful that I got from the book Essentialism is that if you know that 20% of causes lead to 80% of results, well, within those 20% of causes, only 20% truly matter themselves. This means 4% of causes lead to 64% of results. Now, I realize this is very theoretical, but in practice, actually, what I found is that less than 1% of causes often lead to 99% of results. What this means is, this is the second point, is the futility of practically everything. So very few things actually matter in your business and your strategy. Once you identify the few things and decisions that truly matter, focus on them and eliminate the rest ruthlessly. And this is the case for the company. So within your company, almost everything that's being done doesn't really matter. This is true on your sort of to-do list and your decisions and executive decisions that you have to make. So almost everything that you're doing and that you're thinking about does not matter, right? Almost everything is a waste of time within this. Now, and this is also true for your employees and partners or whatnot. Almost everything that they're doing is not particularly valuable and useful. Now, I know that it seems like a very pessimistic view of things, but it's actually very optimistic. So the first conclusion of this is be very wary of adding things to what you're doing. Because every element that you add to a strategy, every element that you add in your company distracts you from this 80-20 of the 80-20. And it reduces the effect, your ability to focus on the very few causes that have very powerful results. And it should be the same thing for your employees. And even within your strategy, the more you can remove and get to the core of why it really works, the better you're going to do. Another important concept is that activity is not productivity. So pursuing more ideas, projects, and activities is not a sign of productivity. It's a sign of profound laziness. And within a company, a culture of busyness is the killer of good strategies. So if you have an e-commerce company and it's a culture of hustle and working all the time and responding on weekends and always being available, it's usually not a good sign. What you want is you want to have, at least for your key people, obviously for customer supporters, things like that, you want them to be very available. But for your key people, for your executives, your strategies, your managers, you want them to sort of remove themselves from the outside world a little bit, do their thing, do the few things that really matter, that really drive results, those lead measures that you've identified within the strategy, and then it sort of ignore all the rest. And by doing that over time, you can gain a huge advantage over competitors. Another very useful framework is the ignore, eliminate, or delegate. So whenever there's an activity that you're supposed to do, that some important person in your organization is supposed to do, but this activity doesn't really move the needle. It's not the 80-20 of the 80-20. Well, you want to find a way to ignore, eliminate, or delegate any activity in the firm that is not part of your core strategy. And it can even include entire branches such as customer service or product development. I mean, if your firm is a performance superiority firm, there are a lot of other things that you should outsource, right? If your focus is on making superior products, you may not want to handle your own customer support. Maybe it's something to think about. Of course, then comes the idea of saying no. So the implementation of a good strategy is oftentimes more about saying no than anything else. And saying no requires discipline and a clear head. And then the last one is thinking long term. So whenever you're thinking about adding activities or expanding or doing all these things, think about how would adding this activity or these extra layers of complexity affect the company 10 years down the line. Second and third order consequences dictate the need for extreme focus. Because what you get when you start thinking in the very long term is you realize that by doing all these separate things, you really can't do any of them well enough for that specific thing to succeed. So I realize this last section is a little bit theoretical, but I really hope it gets you thinking about when you have a strategy, you've done a lot of work, you've really identified to do the strategy. Don't do more. The strategies take time to pay off. And by doing more, you actually dilute your strategy and you make it less likely that it's going to succeed. Okay. So two key distinctions. The first one is strategy versus tactics. Now, this is a huge one. I've been talking about this for a very, very long time in a lot of business groups. Many businesses focus on identifying specific tactics that they hope will help them achieve their desired end results, whether it's gaining market share, growing sales, increasing profitability, etc. In fact, selecting tactics without having an overarching strategy is a surefire way to fail. A tactic can work beautifully within a company when it's aligned with the strategy and fail miserably for the direct competitor simply attempting to steal the tactic. Now, this is a huge one. I could make a whole presentation, the same length as this current presentation, just talking about this. So I'll try to be brief. What is a tactic? Well, a tactic is you see a competitor with a particular product doing well, so you decide, we're also going to launch this product. A tactic is on some shop, you see that they have some feature on the shop that you think they have a live chat on the store, and then you decide to add a live chat. I mean, that's stereotypical tactic example. What are some other tactics? I mean, some other tactics is the kinds of emails that you send after purchase and all these types of things. It doesn't mean they're not valuable, but you need a strategy to make sure the tactics actually fit within the strategy. Because actually, if you have a strategy and you try to implement all these unrelated tactics, you actually dilute the strategy and you really dilute the value of your company. So it's very important to know where you're going first and to know how you're going to get there before getting into the nitty-gritty of what do we do now. Because a lot of people in business, they really just want to do, okay, what do I do now? Well, what I always tell them is before we get to that, let's know where we're going, how we want to get there, and let's have an edge, let's have an advantage an information advantage over the competition, and then whatever we do is going to be much more effective. Another key distinction is the idea of dynamic competition. This one's a little bit more complex, but what it basically means is that a strategy should never assume that your competition is standing still. You have to take into account which moves competitors are likely to make following the implementation of your strategy. So if you're in a very competitive market, whatever you do over time, competitors will figure it out. So you have to design your strategy with the idea in mind that your competitors will respond to whatever you're doing. So if you can plan several moves ahead, to take a chess analogy, well, you're going to get an even bigger advantage. So a good strategy incorporates second and third order consequences in its general direction. What this means is you essentially think, okay, well, let's say we adopt X strategy. How are other players going to react? How are they going to try to replicate this? And how can we prevent this from happening in the first place? It's a very simple idea. So anyway, that sort of brings us to the end of the presentation. So I hope you found it very valuable. I mean, the goal of the presentation is to be standalone and that you can implement it right away. However, one of my firm, Paladir Consulting's newest service offering is what we call digital strategy consulting. So it's exclusively for e-commerce and internet businesses or companies who want to expand into e-commerce and internet retail. So if you believe in the effectiveness of the process I described in this video, we can offer you an in-depth analysis of your business and industry to identify the right strategy for your brand. So this is something we're already doing with clients, and our clients absolutely love this sort of these extra insights that they get. So unlike traditional strategy, what we do, it's not a bloated process that focuses on crazy amounts of research and unfocused insights where we just sort of dump all this information on you and then it's up to you to make the best out of it. It's also exclusively focused on digital strategy, which is very different from the strategy required for brick and mortar businesses. So a lot of the strategy preached by a lot of the big strategy groups is very outdated, right? So we try to avoid this common mistake. Our process focuses on identifying the most optimal strategy that directly leads to simple, practical insights that will produce real, tangible results for your firm. And instead of charging, $500,000 one time without any accountability to formulate a strategy like typical consulting firms, we charge a fixed monthly retainer to provide real applicable insights and help you implement them over time. And this is very important because we are held accountable for the implementation of the strategy and the results of the strategy by working with a company over the long term. It's in our best interest to make sure we have a practical strategy that you can actually apply and actually get results from. So if you have an e-commerce company and you really want to have a clear strategy that will allow you to dominate your market over the long term, and you have this sort of long-term mindset that you really want to win over the long term, then I highly recommend you get in touch with us because I think we can provide a lot of very interesting insights for your firm, and a lot of unconventional insights too that you wouldn't necessarily find in other places. So we're also starting to build a team of extremely smart consultants who think very independently. So we have a lot of the tools in the background to provide you with a lot of value. And then the last thing that I'll mention is we only work with one company in any particular market segment. So what this allows us to do is we obviously now have a portfolio of very successful e-commerce clients, and we can observe how each company is able to succeed in its particular market. And then we can transfer these insights into your particular business because, again, we do not work with companies in competing industries and markets. So we can give you all the insights that we learn from our clients and you can benefit from them. And then we can learn from you and, again, implement it to the other clients. And there's no fear of sort of harming your core market and your core business. So it's a very nice model. So anyway, thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It took me a lot of time to put this together with my company. If you're interested in working with us, feel free to contact us by email or visit our website to learn more about our firm at paladir.com. You can also contact us at info@paladir.com and we will happily respond to your email. On that note, please subscribe to this channel if you want more insights like the ones provided in this video. Make sure to like this video to really boost it up to the YouTube algorithms and rankings. And on this note, I will speak to everyone watching this very soon. Thank you very much.